Welcome to Strip Cover Look, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I am Adrian Fort, and I wanted to spend some time with Emily Dickinson in a way that might be unconventional on the channel. Normally I take a poem and I go through it, but I wanted to spend some time with Emily Dickinson through Harold Bloom in Genius. So in this book, he breaks down different types of genius into different lusters, he calls them, and luster 9 is Ralph Waldo Emerson, Emily Dickinson, Robert Frost, Wallace Stevens, and T.S. Eliot. As good a group to put with whom to put Emily Dickinson as any, I suppose, but this is what he says of that group of writers. The Sephirah, known as Din, serves under the edge or horizon that marks their limit of Hesed's covenant love. I have grouped an American tradition here and included Eliot, despite his overt rebellion against it. Emerson, too easily categorized as transcendentalist, wrote his best book in The Severe Conduct of Life. Emily Dickinson, rigorously original, is a poet of dark judgments, as Robert Frost is after her. Wallace Stevens balances such rigor with surges of affirmation. Those who would follow Eliot at his word to place him elsewhere with Dante or Baudelaire ought to read The Wasteland and Whitman's What Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed, side by side, very closely. Poets, that is to say strong poets, cannot choose their tradition. It chooses them, and makes of their work what it will, subject to their agnostic vitality in fighting back. Harold Bloom, often a defender of the genius of Emily Dickinson. Now, I wanted to fast forward in this book a little bit to the actual entry on Emily Dickinson. And about halfway through, well, maybe a quarter of the way through that entry, we get the excerpt starting here. It is not possible to define Dickinson's private religion, partly because she followed Emerson in exalting whim, which does not belong to the cosmos of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The most subtly intelligent discussion of Dickinson's spirituality is James McIntosh's Nimble Believing, Dickinson and the Unknown from 2000, which takes its title from one of the poet's letters to Judge Lord. Quoting, "On subjects of which we know nothing, or should I say beings, is Phil the judge, and being, or a theme. We both believe and disbelieve 100 times an hour, which keeps believing nimble." End quote. On that account, it keeps believing equally nimble, and no one, including Dickinson herself, could be at all certain just what, if anything, she believed. This is one of the things that I find utterly fascinating with Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson, alive and writing at a time which was pretty hyper-religious in the United States, and very probably divided religiously, but in the same sect of the Abrahamic religions, right? It was all different types of Christianity, but different ways that people said Christianity should be. In light of that, Emily Dickinson decided to say, oh no, I'll just make it up as I go. I'll believe what I want. I will have the conversations with God that I deem necessary. I will even in my poetry speak for him, perhaps, if not at least to him. On that account, it keeps disbelieving equally nimble, and no one, including Dickinson herself, could be at all certain just what, if anything, she believed. I find little in the poems to indicate that she believed in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and she certainly did not accept him as her Redeemer. I think it's a little bit more complex than that. I think that Emily Dickinson, we have Emily Dickinson poetry over the course of basically her entire adult life, and as such, just like you or I might turn forth and back on certain issues, and even religion. People turn back and forth on religion all the time and things that they believe in particular, but one thing to remember about Emily Dickinson's poetry is that this was not out there and published. So it is not as if the poet herself had published something and then said, I got to stick to that. No, these were all private thoughts, just like you have your private thoughts that might differ from things that you have said in public. And Emily Dickinson, I think many times on many subjects, seems to go back and forth on certain things that she believed, not just in religion. But the sufferings of Jesus and his triumph over them were of extraordinary interest to her. Suffering. Emily Dickinson, suffering. Who'd have thunk it? While they meant nothing to Emerson, who regarded Golgotha as a great defeat, and as an American said, we demand victory, a victory to the senses as to the soul, Dickinson found a victory at Golgotha, but only through her outrageous stance as Empress of Calvary, and so as Christ's bride. She intimates that she had married the Holy Ghost, again a very American realization. Mackintosh, perhaps with a touch more residual Calvinism than Dickinson possessed, thinks that Dickinson's awe is a Calvinist inheritance, and yet it appears to be one of her private names for her husband, for her near husband, Judge Lord. And yet, though Dickinson's mature spiritual position is indescribable, Mackintosh is surely accurate in saying that it was not self-contradictory. I disagree. She had worked out a personal religious myth. Do you do that all at once, or do you do that bit and piece at a time? To say that, to assume that she had her personal religion and mythology all figured out by the time she took pen to paper with any of these poems, which is what would have to be assumed for them all to be in accordance, is, in my opinion, simply nonsensical. But she declined to express it fully or consistently, except by dramatizing her place in the myth in her poems. Her awe, like her transport, is a high romantic, and we still have not worked out her complex relation to Wordsworth, Shelley, and Keats. Like Emerson, Dickinson somewhat disconcertingly worships power, joking that power stood in Scripture between the kingdom and the glory, because it is the wildest of the three. Her wildness in Emerson's, and like him, by it she means freedom. Wildness being freedom. That does sound like Emily Dickinson, doesn't it? Wild nights, free nights. She revered Emerson, but unlike Whitman and Thoreau, she cannot be considered Emersonian, because she took such care to keep the sage at a distance. Her supposed struggle with Calvinism, where was it, has little to do with her wariness. Emerson was too close already, both as a poet and as a reconceptualizer. Some of their poems could be assigned to either poet. Hardly a pleasure for Emily Dickinson. To go without models is Emerson's own advice, which Dickinson scarcely needed, being so original as she was. Yet both are poets of sudden epiphanies. Far more benign in Emerson's case. How should we confront Dickinson's genius? That shades into how can we describe a genius so volatile, capricious, conceptually original. Her definitive editor, Ralph Franklin, reminds us that we must go through her idiom to enter her work, as she conducted no negotiation towards public norms for her poetry. The most useful statement that I have ever read about Dickinson is Franklin's, quote, A good citizen of the age of print, she was a committed reader of newspapers, magazines, and books, but could not undertake the commercial, impersonal, and fundamentally exposing act of publishing her work. This is the poet who, knowing her boundaries, said, "I do not cross my father's ground to any house or town." End quote. I take from this the hint that one had better know one's own boundaries when reading this formidable woman, and when trying to comprehend her genius. How many other American writers are of her eminence? How many other writers, period? I mean, one of the things about Bloom is that he was such an elitist that there was no way anything around him could have ever been good enough. So surely American writers were not as good as other writers. I would say just three: Emerson, Whitman, Henry James. I don't see any of those people on her level. I enjoy Whitman. I think that Whitman is Whitman, in my opinion, is sort of like a middle ground between Mark Twain and Charles Bukowski. I don't see that there's anything nearing Emily Dickinson's importance there. But important, yes. I'm not going to say that Mark Twain or Charles Bukowski or Walt Whitman were not important. I don't think they were Emily Dickinson. There are others only a touch or two short of that fourfold: Hawthorne, Melville, Mark Twain, Frost, Faulkner, Stevens, Eliot, Hart Crane among them. What about Ernest Hemingway? If asked the desert island question and could only have one book by an American, I should have to answer Whitman. It's a poor choice. But Dickinson or Emerson would more than suffice. No one should be foolish enough to condescend to Dickinson or to enlist her for any ideology or creed whatsoever. Hazlitt rightly said that in Wordsworth you seem to start anew on the tabula rasa of poetry. That is not as strictly true of Emily Dickinson's poetry as of Wordsworth, but she comes close. I think that she is every bit as tabula rasa as Wordsworth. You know, there are certain things that she sort of takes from other authors, truth and beauty being the same thing, right? We see that with a Grecian urn, right? But I don't think that it is necessarily just recycling things. I think that anything that she borrowed at any point is pretty justly made hers. And in cognitive originality, she surpasses any Western poet except for Shakespeare and Blake. Blake is a interesting case, right? Because so I don't know that Blake would even be more religiously original than Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson, maybe. But Emily Dickinson is so hard to nail down with these things that I don't know that we really get any full sense on it. She can think more lucidly and feel more fully than any of her readers, and she is very aware of her superiority. I don't get that case, that she's very aware of her superiority. I think that is Bloom speaking through the poet there. So I am very cautious when, in what follows, I attempt to track her genius. Though Dickinson is exuberant and can be comically exhilarating, she is a poet whose central mode is an intense suffering, at times so painful and demanding that she affords only the most difficult kind of pleasure traditionally associated with the sublime. When I read her for a prolonged time, and whenever I teach her, the experience exhausts me. And there were people, she met, I can't remember his name, one of the people that she used to write letters to. He came and visited her one time and said that she just wore him out, that he couldn't do it anymore. He never wanted to meet her again, basically. When I read, my fault. It exhausts me the way reading and teaching King Lear devastates me. A poet who says that she likes a book of agony, or a poet who says she likes a look of agony because she knows it's true, risks misprision, as in Camille Paglia's enlisting Dickinson in the ranks of the divine Marquis de Sade. I remember arguing the issue with Paglia, a superb reader, but failing to persuade her. In Dickinson, very difficult pleasures and pains oxymoronically intermingle. And it is also worth remarking that Dickinson, her reputation aside, can be a very erotic poet. Yes, that much is true. I think there is a lot I think that Emily Dickinson, the eroticism in Emily Dickinson is probably overlooked because of all of the sort of pain and suffering that is assumed by the writer. But I think that she's probably halfway the pervert that was William Shakespeare. In Dickinson, very difficult pleasures and pains oxymoronically intermingle, and it is also worth remarking that Dickinson, her reputation aside, can be a very erotic poet, though her genius flourishes wildly in celebrating/lamenting the erotics of loss. Death and passion debate in her, and death necessarily wins. Death and passion debate in Emily Dickinson's poetry, and death necessarily wins. In 1863, Dickinson reached a Christological age and experienced the most fecund year of her poetry was ever to know. Why it should have been her Annus Mirabilis, I can only surmise. In late April of 1864, she went to Boston for eye treatment and returned to Amherst on November 28th. But the previous year was spent peacefully at home without major personal losses. In 1862, she chose Higginson as preceptor long before he went off to be colonel of the Black Regiment. Her major losses cluster later. Her father in 1874, Samuel Bowles in 1878, Charles Wadsworth in 1882, her mother later that year, Judge Lord in 1884, Helen Hunt Jackson in 1885, until on May 15, 1886, Dickinson herself died. With so incredibly inward a genius, as unknown to us as Shakespeare remains, an outward stimulus appears quite unnecessary to prompt the imagination. I think that is something very interesting to consider. You can look at some people, you can look at Bukowski, for example, and see a lot of the things that kind of crafted him into the wry and wily individual that he was. You can look at Hemingway and see some of the early life traumatics and some of the struggles to be a man that manifested in his writings. We don't have that for Shakespeare. We don't know that about Shakespeare. We don't have that for Emily Dickinson. We don't know that about Emily Dickinson. But when you have the brain that those two had, is it necessary? Is it really necessary to have gone through such things in your life? Or can you just manifest the type of genius that you have? I take 1863 not quite arbitrarily, since necessary to prompt the I take 1863 not quite arbitrarily, since it encompasses poems 499 through 793 in Franklin's edition, nearly 300 poems and fragments out of 1,789. Its major lyrics include A Pit, But Heaven Over It, This Is My Letter to the World, It Always Felt to Me a Wrong, I Tie My Hat, I Crease My Shawl, I Reckon When I Count It All, I measure every grief I meet. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The brain is wider than the sky. Much madness is divinest sense. The soul superior instance. I saw no way the heavens were stitched. A tongue to tell him I am true. What soft cherubic creatures. The tint I cannot take is best. I cannot live with you. My life had stood a loaded gun. Renunciation is a piercing virtue. Publication is the auction. I choose those 20 arbitrarily, following personal taste, and omit many of singular value. But those 20 alone are a body of great poetry. How did they emerge outwardly from a quiet year? The Annus Mirabilis, the miracle year. This is something that has always interested me. You can find Nietzsche had a miracle year. Einstein's 1905 miracle year is definitely worth looking into if you are interested in something like that. Lots of different artists, lots of different scientists, lots of different writers had a miracle year. And this is, I hadn't really thought of a single year as a miracle year for Emily Dickinson, not having looked into the actual poems to come out of any specific year. But she had a long spanning career as a writer. And it's interesting that she wrote for so long, and it sort of tails up, or sort of ramps up and tails off her productivity. And I don't know, I wanted to appreciate Emily Dickinson for a few minutes on a Saturday. That is what I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. And as always, I hope to have you back for the next one.